Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the first Estrad lecture for this year, and also for the decade. I want to say welcome to our speakers, Ester Barinaga and María José Zapata Campos. The topic today is social entrepreneurship and grassroots innovations, and I look forward to hear more about that. But first, a few words about ESPRI, the organization that arranged these lectures. My name is Helen Torgrimsson, and I work as a project manager at ESPRI. We disseminate research-based knowledge through these Estrad lectures and other events. Through the magazine Entré, we have 4 different magazines with us today, and also our website with hundreds of web TV and thousands of articles, all about innovation, entrepreneurship, and SMEs. Esther and Maria will talk for about an hour. Then it's time for questions, and around 4:20 we will have a prize ceremony for Nytt och Nyttigt, a thesis competition organized by ESPRI and Vinnova. The ceremony takes about 10-15 minutes, and after that we serve coffee and tea outside, so we hope you can stay and mingle for a while. I would like to thank Tillväxtverket and Vinnova, our main partners, and with that, the stage is yours, Esther and Maria. Welcome.
Okay. Does it work? Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting us over to present our work. I'll start a little bit presenting very briefly the field in where we work, a swift overview about the research, the state of the research. Too close, like this? Is it better? Yes? And then we'll be presenting how we work and with these organizations that we're studying and what kind of findings we're getting at. Yeah? And then to try to connect it back to the field. So the field where we work is often called the field of social entrepreneurship or grassroots innovations. And within the field, there is a big debate about what this is or is not. What is a social enterprise and what defines them? The most dominant, if you want, definition of these organizations, dominant particularly in at the other side of the Atlantic, in North America, is that these organizations are about social change, but one of the main instruments they use to achieve that social change is a market logic, a business logic. So in a way, it is the business of doing good. They have a social mission, but parallel to it, and not compromising with it, there is some sort of a profit motive, right? They use the business tools of normal private companies to achieve social change. On this side of the Atlantic, and particularly in Scandinavia, there is a strong current that says, well, some of the social change that these organizations are trying to achieve, the social problems that they're trying to address are actually created by the market. So if we put as a criteria that they use market tools to solve these social challenges, we are actually excluding a lot of organizations that are organizing to advance social change. So the definition in Scandinavia mainly, or in other parts of Europe as well, goes back to the root of entrepreneurship when they want to define social enterprises. They say, this social enterprise is about organizing, starting up something. It's about entreprendre, setting in motion, right? And they set in motion to something, an organizational process, to advance social change. So these two currents agree on the fact that these organizations aim at advancing social transformation. There is a debate, a big one actually, on whether they use the business tools and business logics of other kind of private companies. Here, the kind of, where we position ourselves in that field is, we are take much more European outlook. We see it as the organizing, the efforts to organize bottom up to advance social change. In the field, because of that dichotomy in a way, much of the research has, however, focused on the organizational and management tools that these organizations use. And so they've either focused on the character and the traits and the personality of the social entrepreneur, how action-oriented they are and how good they are at mobilizing resources and whatnot, or they focus on the management tools and organizational challenges that they meet, or another set of research has actually focused on the hubs, on the support networks, like innovation hubs and social business hubs that these organizations draw their network from. If you, just very swiftly, but if you look at the field, you see that there is a lot of focus on the management and very little focus on actually trying to understand how they advance social change. And yet, when you look at this, the initial debate, that's the only thing they agree on, that these are organizations that try to advance social change. So this is where María José and I are trying to raise some sort of, where our research is going. Say, okay, if we take that seriously, if we take their efforts to organize for social change, then we need to look first at processes. We cannot just focus on the personality of the individual entrepreneur. We need to look at the organizing process for social change. We then see that it's about a comprehensive change. This is not something that is brought about by a single individual or by a single organization. It's actually a collective effort. So what we're looking at is how these organizations build collectively, but also mobilize collectively to advance social transformation in the contexts. We look at not only the management tools, but actually at the wider processes, social processes they tinker with as they try to mobilize material resources or social capital, social networks, or other framings and symbolic ways of talking about what they do that makes or pushes for different attitudes in the stakeholders. And then particularly relevant is when we're talking about social change, we're actually often advancing a particular vision of what society we want to see happen. And this is always political, right? A vision of the future is a political vision. We are favoring one society and not the other. And in these organizations, this political dimension, and I mean political not as party politics, but as the type of society we want to build, this dimension is rather strong. So to try to avoid the conflict with those in the field that talk about social entrepreneurship as the business of doing good, researchers in the tendency, in the trend where we are, have started to talk about grassroots innovations or grassroots processes because it elicits the collective, political, processual dimensions that we want to highlight. Yeah?
Yep.
I think I'm going to give her the word so that you can understand what we are doing.
Thank you. So one of those grand challenges that we are facing, that social entrepreneurs are facing, is that we are heading towards an urban world. Right? You might know that in 2015, 75% of inhabitants in the world are going to be living in cities. So it's a huge challenge. And the citizens of those urban settings are not going to be in the old Western cities, because most of the urban growth is happening in the emerging economies of the global South. So there is a prognosis that says that 1/3 of the inhabitants in the world are going to live in what we call informal settlements, like these ones. You might not be familiar with the context of informal settlements or slums. And actually, it would be unfair to describe them just with a few words because their characteristics are very heterogeneous. But basically, they're characterized by being built up by many of the citizens living in them, by deficiencies in the quality of housing, by the lack of a number of critical services, that it could be waste management collection, it could be sanitation, it could be water supply, it could even be food supply. But we don't want to show an apocalyptic picture of the world, of a planet of slums. Because indeed, when you look a little bit closer, what you see, when you just go a little bit closer to those slums, to those informal settlements, as we like to call them, what we see is a world replete of grassroots innovations and social entrepreneurship. There are entrepreneurs all over the world. in these particular settings, because very often they are not supplied with the formal services that our local governments are providing for us. Like it could be, for example, water supply, or it could be waste collection services. So the citizens have to do it themselves. And even they are also abandoned by the market, because many of those activities or services are not profitable enough for conventional companies. So citizens turn from being recipients of policies and being passively treated as recipients of those policies, they are turned into active agents of change. And many of them turned into this, what we could call social entrepreneurs through these grassroots organizations. And when we talk about grassroots organizations, they could be of very different kinds, like youth groups, women groups, community-based organizations, resident associations. So having this as a starting point, we were lucky that the ICLD, the Swedish Research Institute for Local Democracy, commissioned a research project to some of us in order to explore this grand challenge of our urban society and the possible and the potential solutions coming from all these grassroots organizations in these informal settlements. So I think there are some copies of this report at the entrance. Otherwise, we can, of course, share them. They are electronically available for those of you that are interested. So a part of the research that we are presenting here comes from that piece of research from this project that was supported by ICLD that we finished like last year approximately. And the aim was to examine how grassroots organizations providing these critical services contribute to improve the quality of life of these urban dwellers and more inclusive forms of urban governance, constructing the city from below. And our urban laboratory has been the city of Kisumu in Kenya. I don't know, how many of you have been to Kenya? Oh, a few of you?
Quite a few.
How many of you have been to Kisumu? Yeah, we know, so some in the public can also have some experiences of being there. Kisumu is the third largest city of Kenya. It has around 500,000 inhabitants. It's at the shore of the Lake Victoria. And the reason why we're focused in Kisumu is not only because we have a good constellation of actors, and both in the university but also in the communities that allow us to be able to do research. Like being researchers working here in Sweden, it's quite difficult to do it otherwise. But mostly because, I mean, in the case of Kisumu, approximately 70% of their residents are living in these informal settlements, built up by the same residents in some cases, and providing themselves those services through these grassroots organizations. So they give us like a very good laboratory to start working, to look into these resilient forms of entrepreneurship from the bottom up. And particularly, we focused in the presentation I'm going to make now, we focused on the role of resident associations coming from these informal settlements, because in Kisumu, this form of grassroots organization has become like the standardized organizational form to agglutinate and to represent the interests of different smaller groups operating in the informal settlements. Like, for example, youth groups providing services of waste collection, or it could be women groups working with urban farming, or whatever you call it. So since the last 20 years, these organizations has become a little bit like institutionalized as that kind of organization, like an umbrella organization that is, it could be like a hybrid of a business network or a small chambers of commerce that is putting together those small entrepreneurs, but also having conversations with the local government, with the city and the county, in order to represent the interests of the residents of that community in the policies that later on are going to affect their lives. So we found it was a very interesting point of departure for looking into them. And in many of the cases, these resident associations started by delivering water supply services. And it's not a surprise because water, as we will develop later, is the source of life. It's one of the most critical goods that we need humans to be able to survive. And then new task forces were added along the time, depending on available resources coming from different development programs, from different state programs that could be related to whatever you want to improve the drainage, sanitation, alternative energies, or whatever you name it. So what I'm going to develop for now, it comes from the analysis of some of those resident associations. And what we observed is that those grassroots organizations involved in this production and governance of these critical services have a number of common features or characteristics. They are partial organizations that seem to be incomplete, but they are not. But they try to create the illusion of being true organizations, formal organizations, as I will develop now. They create critical material organizational infrastructures, which paradoxically are hidden to the eye of the one who does not belong to the community, and I will also develop this. And they also develop nested and floating infrastructure. And finally, dormant but visible infrastructures that I will also develop. So let me go to the first characteristic, how these organizations develop as partial organizations. It was very interesting to see how these resident associations put a lot of effort in developing the facade, the appearance of being a formal, hierarchical organization. Like if you looked into, for example, this is, let's say, the headquarters of the Obunga Resident Association, one of the informal settlements in Kisumu, you could read perhaps in the wall the number of the different task forces that exist within that umbrella organization. And you cannot read from there, but I can tell you it's water and sanitation, solid waste management, urban agriculture, and I cannot read it from there. It's energy, it's women's rights, it's health, and something else. So that is one sign of the need to emphasize all the different elements of their organization. They have a head of the organization, the chairman, they have an organizing committee, they have representatives from the different territories of the neighborhood, they have a representative from each of the different task forces, and apparently it seems to be like a very complex and sophisticated organization. But when you look a little bit closer, then you can see how some of those elements are there, but only formally. Like a facade. And that makes you start suspecting that this is an incomplete organization. But indeed, it responds to what we call a partial organization. An organization that, in order to perform, doesn't need to have all the elements of what we traditionally understand as a formal organization. However, they have to put a lot of efforts in keeping the facade of being that formal. Because in gaining that legitimacy, there is a lot for them. In gaining resources from the state, or from the local government, or from the different donors that might come closer and ask for help. So this is because of the image that they might have that resident associations are not reliable. They have never elections. They are very amorphous. So they really need to struggle with this. The second characteristics of these grassroots organizations is that they have developed critical material and organizational infrastructures. Like, infrastructure is something that makes life possible, but often we don't notice that it exists, right? Think about waste management, waste collection here in Sweden. We don't notice that it works, that it's there. You only notice that when it breaks down. When you open the tap here, you always expect water to be running. You don't notice that it exists. It becomes invisible. So it's only when it breaks down that is rendered visible. And this is also what we found here, that there were a number of critical but invisible infrastructures that made possible materially and organizationally the life of these grassroots organizations. Because, and that is particularly relevant in a context of uncertainty, of scarcity of resources, and of constant changes, whereas the context where many of these populations, these people live. So it was very easy to see how you could have very fluctuant task forces that were active during, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, until the resources from a particular donor dried out, and then that task force would remain more like by dormant. So what is it that really made those grassroots organizations keep being kept alive? It was this critical infrastructure. And we found 2 examples of this. The first one was the delivery of water services. And that is very easy to understand, because without water there is no life. I think we have some quotations from here, like water is the mother of others, water is life. So providing this water provision service was a good source of income for those for the different groups, an income that was then invested in the same organization, at least part of it, to keep the organization alive. The second one, and here it is when the role of Esther comes into our research project, is the existence of what it's called table banks. Some of you that have in Kenya or other similar contexts might know what they are, but to explain it very, very simply, table banks are collective strategies of saving and taking loans. So people meet regularly, very often once a week, in small groups like this, for example, under a tree, the same day, the same time, every week, and they put an amount of money every week. It's their savings. Because as you can imagine, like formal financial infrastructures are not available for many of the residents of these informal settlements. So they need to create their own financial infrastructures. They need still to save their money, to make the effort to save their money, to invest that money in the entrepreneurial activities that they are developing, whatever it is, selling food, selling water. So they meet regularly, they save the money, and they have different, every table bank, and you can develop it later, Esther, they are different to each other, but that's the basic idea. And for us it was very interesting because and it was actually, at the very beginning, we didn't notice that they existed. And it was not only us as foreigners, but also even some part of the research team that was based in Kisumu. They had not noticed that they existed in the context of those resident associations. And it is because, as I will argue later, because they remained like kind of floating. It was some members of the resident association that were members of these table banks that used this space to meet. But interestingly, the resident associations started seeing the capability of this infrastructure to empower many of the services and the products that they develop. And they started connecting some of these table banking groups, creating new table bank groups connected, for example, to the water task force. And in that way, they managed to save some money to buy new pipes, for example, to extend the network of water supply in the neighborhood. So it was, that's how we started reflecting about the important role of this critical infrastructure in the material survival of the organizations. But even beyond that, another effect that this critical infrastructure has is that they provided with cohesion to the group and stability, because you have to meet once a week. And one problem of those resident associations, as also have many other associations around the world, is like how you encourage people to come week after week. So one way to do it is that, okay, as they say in one of these quotations. Money matters, so it's not written here, but where your money is, you go there as well. So you have to pay a fee every time you meet, and if you don't attend the meeting, then you get a fine. So there is a system of fine and benefits that it's quite complicated and well developed. So suddenly, people started attending the meetings as well, and started creating an important cohesion within the group through these face-to-face meetings. The third characteristic of these grassroots organizations is that they developed nested but also floating infrastructures. Nested infrastructures, you have here this a picture of one of those Russian dolls that is contained one into the other one. So I think that is a good metaphor of how these resident associations were organized. Because they were like an umbrella organization that were containing many other different groups of very different sizes. And it was very smart because the resident association was kind of like the entry point for example, researchers like us that didn't belong to the community. We want to understand what kind of grassroots innovations are on the ground. I mean, we should go to someone that could introduce us into the community. And the same do other donors, NGOs, state agencies, local government. So the role of this resident association is also to constantly scan the grassroots to see, okay, what are the new economic activities, social activities going on here? And as soon as someone comes and asks for something in particular, I want to meet the group who is working with the alternative energies or whatever, yeah, don't worry. Then we scan the grassroots of our territory, and then we bring in these people to the meeting. So it has a very important role in connecting the very bottom of the grassroots with other organizations outside the community. At the same time, we also observed how a number of those bodies within the resident associations, like the case of the table banks, they were also like kind of floating. Like even if the resident associations really put a lot of effort in having like a very clear organigram with a hierarchy where you could see where all the different task forces are, suddenly it started like organically new groups being created within the resident association, kind of floating more organically, as I say. This is why we have this nebulous picture here. Yeah. Just me say. The fourth characteristic of these grassroots organizations is that they also created a number of dormant, but in this case, visible infrastructures. And I have already mentioned some of them, like this number of different task forces, like the case of, say, human rights or women empowerment. For example, this is our colleague, a waste speaker from Brazil that came to one activity, and a waste speaker to waste speaker activity exchange in Kisumu, and he was pointing out to the woman empowerment, or he wanted to be taking a picture in that wall, because he was particularly interested in that theme. So he wanted to show to the group where he belongs to in Sao Paulo that, look, they're working with this. But actually, that women empowerment task force is more like a dormant task force for this, for the Obunga Resident Association. Because it was started years ago when one particular NGO started a program in collaboration with them, but now it remains dormant, but visible, still left on the wall. And that is very important, because one, if it's dormant, it's still there for whenever a new opportunity from the context appears for funding new activities. Say that the new state program comes and wants to contact someone that is working with women empowerment. That infrastructure is still there. It can be activated very quickly. Among other reasons, because many of the members of the resident association rotate in different other groups. If this group is not already active, then probably you move to some others. So still the knowledge and the abilities and the competencies are kept within the organization. But at the same time, you still need to have that organism alive. The resident association needs to continue being alive. But you get that through the critical infrastructure that they have created, through the water supply, for example, or through the table banking. And it's like, we just deleted the pictures not to make people confused about it, but we usually use the metaphor. It could be like a bear, if I say that in English, bear. Yeah. Like a bear that is hibernating, right? When it's dormant, when there are no resources to use, so it's much smarter, efficiently to remain dormant. But you still need to keep a minimum of energy to keep that organism alive until, spring comes. Or it could be one of those rivers from the place where I come from in the Mediterranean, that it's only full of water during it could be the rainy season. But you still need that infrastructure that is dry during the winter time. But you need it to make that flow of water find a way. So this is a very important function it has. Yeah, and but I think it was particularly important from this first research that we conducted, the role of these critical financial infrastructures, these critical grassroots innovations, because that is what really permitted the survival and the sustainability of these grassroots organizations. And actually this was why we invited Esther to participate in this research project and to help us develop a little bit more, okay, how can we strengthen the role of these table banking groups, for example? Is there any other financial grassroots innovation that we can put together so we can empower a little bit more these other services and entrepreneurs, and this is when...
Yeah. So what María José's research was highlighting was that in order to advance social transformation, there needs to be some sort of financial infrastructure. And these are groups that, by definition, have no access to formal banking or to formal debt financing or loans or whatever. They were very successful at creating financial infrastructures of their own so that they could bring the pipes to the neighborhoods or organize waste collection and recycling services. Yep. Right? So that's where I came in. I'm so grateful for that.
Me too.
So we're thinking, okay, these table banks are being very strong, but what we're seeing too throughout Europe, what I was seeing throughout Europe was that there was another kind of financial infrastructure that grassroots were using after the 2008 post-financial Europe. And these were community currencies. These are monies that are created by groups of people, sometimes with local authorities and with the local mayor, sometimes without them, to fund themselves. So we brought the idea to Kenya. I'm gonna, with this image, thank you, María José. Yeah, yep. With this image, just for those of you that who has heard of community currencies before today, before now? 1, 2, 3, 4, very few people. Just gonna be very quickly telling you the main key principles of these currencies so that you understand in what sense they become a social entrepreneurial initiative that builds financial infrastructures for social chain efforts. These currencies, main focus is the idea that money needs to circulate. The more money circulates in a community, the more economic activity there is. When people, for whatever reason, save their money, which is much needed, one of the functions of money is actually to save it so that you can pay for your children's education in the future, or for, but when you're saving your money, you're taking it out from circulation. This is what happens. I come from Spain. In post-2008 crisis, what people were doing, and my cousins were doing, is I'm going to save on the morning cafetito because I don't know whether I'm going to have a job next month. Within the first year of the financial crisis, over 5,000 cafes alone, in Madrid alone, went bankrupt because people were saving in the morning cafetito, right? So what these currencies say, well, we're going to design so that people want to spend this money. Right? They design for circulation. And not only that, they design for circulation, but another problem that these social entrepreneurs say is that another problem with our current monetary system or our current money is that this money works everywhere, which means that villages, in the case of Kenya, or cities that are at the periphery, see their money leak out, they use that term, leaking out of the community rather easily. There was a study a couple of years ago in Santa Coloma de Gramenet. It's a small city for Spanish standards, about 200,000 people, north of Barcelona. And they tried to study how long money introduced in that city through social benefits, how long it remained in the city and thus promoted the local economic activity. It remained the euros introduced through social benefit and social welfare programs remained in Santa Coloma for 2 to 3 days. It very quickly leaked out to the big city, to Barcelona. Right? So it actually helped the local community for a very short period of time. So community currencies are designed to increase circulation and thus increase economic activity. Those are the principles. Yeah? When I'm talking about community currencies, we're studying the ones in Kenya because they are the most pioneering in many senses, you'll see that. But this is, in Spain alone, there are over 400 community currency schemes. In Germany is a big movement, it's called the Regio Geld movement. In the UK, it's framed as the UK transition town currencies. In France, they even have legislation about it. In Portugal, the town halls are building it to build their waste collection infrastructures. So it is a tool that increasingly is being used all throughout Europe, also in the States. Some of the currencies here, actually the Berkshires, is an American currency. You have the test pilot kind of currencies in Gothenburg, Majorna. It is a tool that is increasingly being used by civil society organizations and other kind of grassroots entrepreneurs. Thank you. So now we fly back to Kenya. In Kenya, these community currencies were introduced by Will Roddick, an American social entrepreneur that was acquainted with these currencies both from the Berkshire's experience in the States, but also he had been living in Geneva and he had been studying the European currency. And he thought, wow, if this works over there, why can't we use this to help vulnerable communities help themselves? And so he introduced first paper, but then later digital currencies in vulnerable communities. This one is, and the examples that I'm going to tell you about is in a rural community an hour and a half from Mombasa. During the rainy season, you cannot access it. It's quite remote. And they're using this kind of digital crypto blockchain-based community currencies. They're paying for each other's services, for working the land, even for maize flour, for water, for sewing services. They're paying with these community currencies. The way it works is that I have that in my phone now, you send a little text message to a small number to enroll. And you get a message back saying, now you've been enrolled in the Sarafu or currency, or the Millani Pesas as it's called there. And as you're enrolled, you receive, and this is very much how the crypto world works, you're airdropped, that's the proper crypto term, you're airdropped 400 Sarafos, so Millani Pesas. So I enroll and I get 400 monetary units that I can start using immediately to buy flour or shrimps or water or whatnot. Yeah? It is a view of how the economy works and how community relations work that is very much based, like the original ideas of the crypto activists, is very much, this needs to be open to all, right? Everybody, no matter who you are, your age, your gender, your class, your clan belonging, whoever, just by sending a little text message can get access to 400 the equivalent to 400 Kenyan shillings. So it's open to all. Their goal, like the original goal of the initial crypto activists, is let's build a network, an infrastructure that connects communities internationally. It's not just for us, it's we're building a global infrastructure. To do that, to build an infrastructure that works globally, they need to standardize the technical solution, because if each community has a different solution, then we won't be able to trade among each other. So they try to standardize the technology, and as they do that, they assume, and we'll see that later better, they assume a human behavior that we often in economics call the homo economicus. They assume that individuals will always look for their own individual interests when doing economic calculations. Not the community, but for themselves. They see the economy as separate from society. I'll explain that later. So back to the table banks. How does this fit with the table banks? When we first started studying the community currencies in Kenya, the entrepreneur who had been living in those communities hadn't yet seen the table banks. They are, as María José was saying, they are invisible, very stable, somehow very invisible organizations. This particular table bank, and that picture is taken at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. There's a lot of people that are not awake at that time, even in those areas. They meet every Tuesday by the shade of this big tree, and they bring together their savings. They collect them. If you see, there's a tin box there. They collect the savings in the tin box. Then they go around every single woman that is there. And as you see, in these table banks are dominated by women. They go around and see the needs for credit or for loan for that week for all the women. They count how much they've saved. They count what the needs are. And this is where it's interesting. Very often, there is much larger need than there are savings. So they start taking very sensitive financial decisions about very sensitive community decisions about whose need is biggest. My kid got sick and he's going to be hospitalized for a week. I don't have the money to both feed the other 9 children plus pay hospitalization. Okay, but if we give it to you, then the other mother has other needs. Right? These community, very sensitive decisions. Financially, very difficult too. They negotiate interest rates, they negotiate repayment schedules, they postpone or repayment schedules. They do fine or give fines to those that are misbehaving. And they even have fines if you don't bring the T-shirt for it's a mix, they use a mix of coercion and trust to take decisions that are economically very relevant for the people, for the individuals, but also for the community, right? Is it time to develop your business, or is it time to feed this family? It is relevant for the community. The view of the economy, is very different to the one we saw in the crypto community currency activists. What you see is that there is a clear boundary, and it seems, it's a clear boundary on who has access to those economic structures, right? It's not open to all. We need people that we know are going to behave and are going to pay back and are not going to steal and whatnot. The goal is not an international infrastructure. The goal is to build resilience in the community. And every single woman I've interviewed in this, I've interviewed in Miami, and we've interviewed in Kisumu, and you've seen elsewhere, belong to more than one savings bank or table bank. Some of them belong to even 4 or 5. The goal is to build community resilience by increasing their capacity to save and to borrow, by creating their own banks. They are far from wanting any standardized solution. The rules of the table banks in Miami differ radically from the rules of the table banks in Kisumu. Within Miami, you can find very different rules because the women or the people these banks serve vary, and their social conditions vary radically, right? So the governance rules are very much contextualized to the community. They acknowledge the coexistence of impersonal financial relations and extremely personalized, intimate relations. They don't separate the economy from the community. These two are woven together, right? So now you're having the entrepreneur, through a research team, realizes these table banks are very resilient. They have created a very big financial literacy in the community, and they can be fantastic tools to actually anchor the community currencies in the community and actually spread them out. So how do these two logics merge? The first step he does is, okay, we'll create a fiat gateway. What he does is that these currencies are not going to be able to exchange between each other. Remember, they may have very different rules, but he's opening the possibility to exchange across currencies, as well as to exchange it with the Kenyan shillings, with the conventional national currency. The second one is that he says, okay, let's create table banks where savings are also possible. That also saves in community currency. They both save in Kenyan shillings and save in the community currency. And remember, if you remember from the first slide on the community currencies tried to avoid saving. They wanted money to circulate, not to be saved. So you see here the table banks that are saving both in Kenyan shillings and in the sarafu currency. What happened? What was the consequence of mixing these two logics? Is one taking over the other? So what we saw is, what we're seeing actually, is that the spreading of these currencies skyrocketed. Within 2 months, you have 24 savings groups in sarafu. You have over 90% of the community penetration with the community currency. You had other communities coming in there to learn and wanting to introduce the community currency. So in that sense, it was a very strong diffusion mechanism. We also saw that communities were getting the idea of building cooperative businesses. That picture is taken in August, September, the first one, the one with the dry maize. There had been a big drought in Kenya. People were not eating, and they didn't have flour dinner. And what they did is that they saved together in these table banks. They went to the broker, exchanged their collective savings into Kenyan shillings, bought maize in Kenyan shillings, brought it back to the mill, milled it or grind it, and then sold the flour in sarafu. So now the community was able to eat when they hadn't been able to eat 1 month earlier. They were building cooperative businesses that didn't exist before, just the creation of these financial infrastructures. However, you have the critique internal from the community themselves that you would expect if you introduce a logic, an economic logic that is foreign to the community. Some of the people are saying that's building dependency on the donors, because someone is putting those Kenyan shillings we are converting our sarafus with. The day the donor disappears, the day the social entrepreneur disappears, we're maybe even worse than we were before. We don't want to build dependency. These table banks made us independent and autonomous. You're building dependency in the community. The other problem is that it's fostering savings. And these savings are not moved and loaned back because they want them to exchange them for the national currency. And what is happening is that you have less money circulating in the community, which is counter to the original logic of the community currency, right? Money doesn't circulate, it stays in the box or in the phone. The third one is that it introduces a speculative behavior. So you have, whereas the first time we went, we didn't see anybody thinking, I'm gonna keep it now till there is a better exchange rate or till I get better. Now you have individuals saying, no, I'm not gonna exchange it now even though the community need it, because I can't wait to get a better exchange rate. And this is a behavior that they admitted was foreign previously to the community. And the fourth one is that although, and you'll hear this a lot in the crypto world, this is an open source, it's very transparent technology. I don't know about you, maybe there is some mathematician here, but me and our economic friends have a hard time understanding those formulas. Yes, they're all out there. They are difficult to read. And in communities that have been managing their own monies, that have been taking difficult banking and financial decisions, and difficult not only community-wise, but also banking-wise, you're closing down the possibility to actually increase financial literacy. I think, yeah? So the question that we are struggling with is, well, let's see, first, it's interesting, from a research perspective, it's just very interesting to see how different logics mix when entrepreneurs with different economic ideas and different ideas of society and what society we want to build are trying to work in the same communities. What we're learning also more specifically from this particular example that we just presented is 4 things. One is that we usually think of money as a neutral thing is in economic transaction. What we're seeing is that it depends on how you design the monetary system. There are very many different designs. And you can either, the way you design money can either strengthen community or dissolve it. And the real challenge that we're struggling with is to know which monetary system fits this particular community. Is to see the difference. The second one is that we tend to think about technology as neutral, and what we're seeing is that, in our case, the crypto world, they are programming this different set of values and of thinking about what communities are. It's being programmed in the technology. And through the technology, enforcing those values and sets of beliefs and ways of organizing social relationships, it's being forced on the community. We often think, when we discuss monetary policies and economic policies and whatnot, we think of the economy as separate from community. What we're seeing is that community and economy are tightly intertwined, and we shouldn't discuss economy without discussing society. And as soon as we're trying to project us into, as soon as we are in social transformation processes, we cannot discuss just the society without discussing the economy. We need both. And the final one is that we often think, and I think that came very, very strong from your initial research and the research that I continue doing in Kisumu, is that we often tend to think about grassroots organizations as those volatile, insignificant, transitory organizations where you find passionate individuals, eldsjälar, as you say in Swedish. And what we're seeing is that those grassroots organizations are key, essential structures actually driving, introducing new ideas in community and advancing social change. Yeah? I think we would like to stop there so there is some time for...
Thank you. Thank you so much. Then we will open up for questions. So just raise your hand and we will come with the microphone. Yes, thank you. I think 1, 2, 1. Yes, it's on. Nej, that was you. Sorry.
Det är bara en sak, det går jättebra att ställa frågor på svenska. Eller, jag vet inte om jag förstår folk från Stockholm, men göteborgska förstår jag. Men om ni vill, ja, det går bra.
Ska jag ställa frågan på göteborgska då, eller?
Det går bra.
Då är det kanske jag som inte förstår.
Det finns ingen ursäkt jag inte förstår nu.
I can do it in English in case there are participants here
Thank
who
you.
do not understand Gothenburgian. Okay, maybe you could, well, first of all, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Maybe one thing you can just clarify, I couldn't really understand when you took us from the introduction of community currency, which is supposed to be a local currency, which is basically based on the local transactions and the local economy. So how did that connect to the formal currency? Why did someone have to put in Kenya shillings through the M-Pesa into that system to make it circulate. Wasn't the whole idea to actually have it more or less independent from the financial system of the country?
That's exactly what we're looking at. So we have communities that are very strong and that have a lot of financial literacy through the table bank and a lot of monetary knowledge because they've had paper-based community currencies. You have that on the one side. On the other side, you have the social entrepreneur that's been living there for over 11, almost 12 years, that says, we need to scale this up. The impact is too small. I want more communities in this. We need, and he gets in contact, he's a trainee engineer and programmer. He gets in contact with the crypto world, and this is where these monetary ideas, aware of it or not, start coming into the system. And he said, well, this technology is really good to spread it fast. Let's introduce it. And so they go from having a paper-based currency that was not redeemable with national currency to have a digital currency that now he makes redeemable to the national currency. The way he makes it redeemable is that he's found some external donors, some from the crypto world, some from the Red Cross, to pool conventional money as reserves and open it up so that to attract communities, but also to be able to calculate the level of reserves that each currency needs to have in order for them to be able to trade among each other. And that's how I don't know if I'm too quick in explaining, but that's how the idea got introduced into these grassroots innovations. Yes, does that answer?
Yeah, no, I was thinking that perhaps you could develop a little bit more the role of the agents and why it was necessary to introduce them or not. Because that's also the connection between the Kenyan shillings, the national currency, and the community currencies.
The broker, you mean?
Yeah.
So,
the agents.
Yeah, the agents. So you mentioned M-Pesa. In Kenya, I don't know, who else has heard about M-Pesa? Yeah. M-Pesa, it stands for mobile M. Pesa means money in Swahili. And it was introduced in Kenya by Vodafone in 2007, I think. Within 2 years, it spread out in Kenya. It is a way to give access to financial services, if you want, to people that have no access to banks. Through the telephone, you can send money between telephones. The way that is done in faraway villages like the one we're studying is that there is a broker, an M-Pesa agent, as it's called, that hands out Kenyan shillings, I mean, yeah, if you sell your airtime. It's through airtime. So the idea with M-Pesa is I have airtime in my phone that I've prepaid, and I have my daughter in Nairobi, and she needs money, and I'm sending her through airtime, I'm sending her that money that she can then go to the agent and get paid in Kenyan shillings. They have a lot of knowledge on currency exchange systems, and so the social entrepreneur was using the M-Pesa agents to do the same with the local currencies. Yeah, I hope I addressed that question.
Okay. Someone else want to ask a question? Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is how the tax was collected, the business was done, and how did the tax office reacted?
Okay, that's a question that has very different answers depending on the community currency. In Kenya, tax is not collected in the community currencies. This is for informal settlements, for communities that are far away, and for community services. In the European currencies, some are accepted and acknowledged by local authorities, and so they pay the local taxes in the community currency, or some of the local taxes in the community currency. That's the case of the Portuguese currencies. That's the case of some of the Catalan currencies as well. But most currencies haven't managed to build that relationship with local authorities. Not because they don't want, but because the local authorities are scared.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Someone else? Raise your hands. You have a...
Yeah, if I can just ask a question. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay.
Some I don't really grasp.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right, because I don't really understand. I understood the table banking very different from what I'm hearing now.
Okay.
And another thing is maybe because I've got other, I know more of where and how, so I won't go in too deep to it. I guess it's another story. But what I'm really wanting to understand is, right now there is a lot of discussion about the East African currency.
The East African?
Currency.
Mm-hmm.
The so-called East African shilling.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think it's going to affect the model of what is now already presented?
Which East African shilling? I mean, what country?
East African shilling is the one that existed before the fall of East Africa. Then East Africa was revised, even it's now having the same passport, and it includes right now 3 countries, I guess, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. So they are bound now also to share, as before, they were sharing the same currency. So now all these table kind of bankings are also going to be affected. So the presentation that you gave, I just want to have a grasp how you think it's going to affect.
I think since the 2008 crisis, there's been a lot of discussion going on in the world about, okay, let me rephrase. In 2008, one of the big consequences of that financial crisis is that a lot of people started asking questions like, where does money come from? Who is creating our money today? Who is managing it? Who is taking the decisions of where to invest it and where not to invest it? And as a result, there is a lot of monetary innovation. The cryptos are just one monetary innovation. Community currencies are another. But you have movements like the positive money movement, asking for sovereign money, and you have many other kinds of movements. I'll discuss I'll put the discussions going on in Africa at the moment, in East Africa, but there is also in former French colonies, they have a similar discussion actually. I'll put it within that big global conversation about how our international monetary system should look and how our national currencies should look. These are discussions that affect us all. So that's to put it. And one of the discussions there is we need a monetary system that is multi-currency based. So now we're used to thinking particularly in Europe and in the Western world, we're used to thinking about one country, one currency. And what many of these activists and scholars and practitioners are saying, that is a problematic issue. We need several currencies in one and the same country that fulfill different functions. Because when a currency works well as a saving instrument, you save it, what you're doing is taking it out of circulation. And what you do then is that it's going to work badly as a medium of exchange because it doesn't circulate. So let's have several currencies that fulfill different functions. And that's what you would have with the table bank. So it's whatever the change doesn't mean necessarily that table banks are going to become irrelevant. I don't think so, because we're seeing they are key, for instance, to develop water infrastructures and waste collection services and drainage systems and whatnot. It's just part of a wider conversation of how we should design our monetary systems. Yeah?
Thank you. We have a question here.
It's been starting a lot of e-currencies in the world. What do you think about Facebook Libra in this case?
About?
Facebook Libra. Libra?
Libra?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's completely a different world. First, a lot of the partners are jumping off. We could discuss it at so many levels. One is the monetary system. It's what is called a stable coin. What a stable coin means is that it's backed by other currencies that are seen as more stable as the crypto. In the Libra case, I don't know if they even had decided what currencies those were going to be. If they were going to be other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, or if they were going to be national currencies. I don't think they've gone that far. That's one of the problems. I think that monetary system sucks. But we can discuss that later. The other is actually the partnership, the actors that were involved in that partnership. And they were all belong to or most of them to the corporate world. And we could also have a critical approach to that, whether we want our monetary system to be ruled by corporate private actors. That's where we are now, however, but those are very different discussions, and I'm happy to have them, but I think it's taking us out from this conversation.
Thank you.
So, thank you for sharing interesting thoughts. It seemed like it started then with the community currency in paper that was supposed to promote the local economy. And then they combined it with this crypto currency that is really very global. So it's very contradictory to put this together.
I agree.
So do you see that path forward is really possible even, or something you would like? What do you see would be a successful way forward? And also I would like to ask, do you think this is more relevant for local communities, like small villages, or do you even see it in urban settings, that you could start thinking more locally about money also in big cities? And
So those are two questions.
Yes.
Can I answer first the second one, whether I see this not only in village and rural and isolated places, but in Europe, and I see that in Spain, my home country, but in Europe there are currencies that are city-based and working well. You have, in Germany, you have the Chiemgauer in Bavaria, which reaches 600,000 users. That's not a village. So yes, I see their use, partly because of this argument I was having on the multi-currency systems. They have a reason to be. That's one. The first question was, can you help me again? I'm sorry. The contradictory logic.
This trickiness of having two different philosophies, basically trying to combine them, if that's even a good idea.
You can explain
I can
the
explain.
contradictions we are experiencing now, trying to develop this community currency in Kisumu.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
So, right at the moment, we are having quite a big debate within the research group, where some stand on the crypto, what I would say the crypto world. We need to expand fast. We have an urban challenge. We have a planet of slums. We cannot go slow. And community currencies, per definition, are very slow at starting up and scaling up and building whatever. They take time. We need that kind of speed. Whereas the other part of the research group says, yeah, but you're bringing values and practices that are foreign to these communities, and who are we to impose and enforce those values and through the technology? And so we are actually at that impasse.
Yeah, if I may add something,
Please.
You're the expert in community currencies, but for me the most fascinating thing when we visited some of those community currencies in Mombasa and Nairobi is how people could have that it developed a financial literacy among people, that ordinary people could know so much about finances, much more what an ordinary average person would know here in Sweden. And this is because at the moment they were developed as a community, with a community logic. It was possible to open up the black box of money. You could understand what money is and how it is designed and the consequences of it. While when you're introducing this new technology and you see these formulas that you were presenting to us, suddenly you black box again what money is and how it is designed. Yeah, and that's something that we're struggling with, because at the same time that we would like to accelerate a change, an innovation that is a niche that you can see that we've seen the positive impacts of people from eating once a day to eating twice, which is quite considerable. And you would really understand the anxiety of Will and other people saying, like, we really want to scale this up. But then the price to do it is when you lose this emancipatory power that community currencies might have. Because it's about, probably the most important change is the change about knowledge, the knowledge of what money is. So, I don't think we have yet a solution for this, do we?
No, there is not. There is a big debate. I mean, in economics, the debate has been going on for decades. It's Galbraith against Friedman, it's Hayek against Keynes. You know, they haven't solved it. Maybe we solve it with this little project. I don't think so. But I mean, it is a debate that runs through a lot of scientific fields.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Yes, we have one here and after that.
Thank you. How about unintended consequences, fraud, and that? How is that handled?
Yeah, so all these bats that we were highlighting are unintended consequences. The black boxing that María José talks about, the black boxing of what money is not something that the entrepreneur intended, but it's what's happening. The slowing down of the circulation is not something that the entrepreneur intended, but is happening. So all these are unintended consequences that come with the monetary model that is being programmed in the technology. That's what we would argue. And so it is time that we think, I mean, what this brings to us is that it's about time that we think about what sort of values and ideas of community and economy are we building into our monies, our technologies, and our organizations. Yeah.
Is that supposed to be an answer to the question?
So your question is, what are the unintended consequences? And I'm answering you, these are the unintended consequences. All these are the unintended consequences. The next one. So they are building this dependency. He didn't intend that, but it's what's happening. They are fostering savings, which means slower circulation. He didn't intend that, but it's happening. They are introducing a behavior that wasn't in the community, but it's happening. And they are closing, black boxing what money is. Those are unintended consequences.
Of this particular
design. Yeah? Does that answer your question now?
No.
No? So what unintended consequences are you thinking about?
We can take it in the mingle. We can take it later.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question also for María José. And there was something you said about your findings that intrigued me. And one was that the organizations on water and table banking seem to be more robust or stable than other organizations or task forces. So one would, of course, like to know, why is that? So possibly, is it due to the nature of the services, or is it some features of the organizations that you have been able to identify? And what would those features be?
Yeah, I think it is more related to the nature of the services and goods that they are producing. This is why we say that they're materially and organizational vital for the organization, because you cannot live without water, and you also need savings to continue with your daily life and investing in your own business. So it's probably that the kind of the nature of the goods and services that makes them more critical. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. We have time for one short question, if you have one. No? Then we can move on. And I would like to say thank you very much, Ester and Maria, for an interesting lecture. We have 2 presents for you.
Oh, thank you.
First, we think you can make your own grassroots innovation in this small greenhouse. So
Thank you.
there you are. And we like knowledge very much.
It's good.
Give it a thought.
See?
So we support UNICEF's work with School in the Box. So
Super.
yes. Thank you so much. I suppose you will be here during the fika later?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can ask more questions to them then. Please leave your microphones because we are...
We're not taking
need
Göteborg.
them. You don't. Perfect. Yes, thank you. Yeah. And now it's time for the award ceremony in Nytt och Nyttigt, the thesis competition organized by Esprit and Vinnova. Please welcome up on the stage with a warm applause Ebba Andersson, Kajsa Eckervall, Karin Nilsson, and Paulina Savicki. Unfortunately, 2 of the winners couldn't be here today. Esprit's, please stand here. Esprit's managing director, sorry. My glass is on. Just a moment. There we are. Yes. Esprit's managing director, Magnus Aronsson, and Jakob Hellman, acting head of health division from Vinnova, will conduct the ceremony. Please. Here you have your microphones.
Let's use this one. Thank you very much, Helene. And this is one of the highlights of the year, to be able to give out the awards to the winners of the thesis competition Nytt och Nyttigt that's been organized by Esprit and Vinnova for the last 10 years. With this competition, Esprit and Vinnova wants to encourage students at master and bachelor levels to write about innovation and commercialization. And this year we had a record number of submissions, were 94 submissions, so quite a hard process to choose. And today we will announce the 3 best ones. In total they will get travel stipends, grants for up to 65,000 crowns. So let's congratulate these again. We have 2 of them here. One of the 2 of the students couldn't be here, or former students couldn't be here today, so they will be given their award at another occasion. But we also want you that are here to be a bit more interested in what they have been writing about. So we would like now so you want to read about their theses. So I would like now to ask Ebba and Kajsa about what are the most important findings in your thesis with the title Enabling Successful Collaboration on Digital Platforms in the Manufacturing Industry, a Study of Digital Twins. Who wants to answer? 2 words.
Yes. So we've studied digital twins in the manufacturing industry, and what we noticed is that this is something that the manufacturing industry is talking a lot about, and they really want to work with it. But I think one of the most important insights from our study is that the companies can't only focus on the technological development, they also have to pay attention to the more management and organizational issues in order to obtain the benefits of the technological solution. Do you have anything?
Do you want to add something? And you can read more about what they have written about in a short summary that will be available when you leave the room for the mingle, for all of the 3 theses. Okay.
All right, thank you, Magnus. First of all, I would like to say that Darja Isaksson, our Director General, couldn't be here, but she's very sorry about it and says hello. So I go from here to Karin and Paulina. So you have written the thesis, Internationalization Challenges Among Born Globals, Roadmap for Higher Success. So the same questions to you, the most important findings in a short version.
All right, so like we said, we wrote our thesis about born globals. So that's companies that undertake international business very close or at their founding. And we looked at possible challenges and also action of how to address these. And we found 5 possible challenges and 8 actions that can address either one of the challenges or a few, or all of them. And the 3 most important challenges that we found that we believe born globals kind of need to consider when entering a new foreign market is a lack of networks, because you need some attachment when you enter a new market, new to the world. And that means that it's hard to enter a market when someone or people don't know your product or service. And then also lack of partnerships. Yeah. Great.
So just before we move on to next, one of the things we always have in these competitions is that they don't know if they have the 3rd prize, the 2nd prize, or the 1st prize. So far it's only the jury and of course now Jakob and I that know that. But so.
Yeah, thank you. Now the excitement begins. So we will begin by announcing the 2nd prize. So the 2nd prize and the travel grant of 20,000 crowns goes to the drum roll, no? Karin Nilsson and Paulina Savicki for the thesis Internationalization Challenges Among Born Globals, a Roadmap for Higher Success, written at Luleå University of Technology. Congratulations. So the 3rd prize and a travel grant of 15,000 goes to Emma Berg and Cecilia Josefsson for their thesis, Enabling Digital Transformation, a Dynamic Capabilities Approach. They are not here, and they're written it at Linköping University. So unfortunately, they couldn't be here. They will get it later, I guess. So, finally, and now you figure it out. The 1st prize and a travel grant of 30,000 goes to Ebba Andersson and Kajsa Eckevall for the thesis Enabling Successful Collaboration on Digital Platforms in the Manufacturing Industry, a study of digital twins, written at Luleå University of Technology. Congratulations.
Thank you, Jakob, and once again, huge congratulations. Well done, well deserved. It was a very hard competition this year, so let's them give another heartful and huge applause. As I mentioned in the beginning, that you will find summaries outside this room, and there will be even longer summaries on the competition websites. That's innovationsuppsats.se. And if you in your network have students that are writing the thesis right now during this academic year, please let them know about this opportunity. We hope to have even more submissions this year. And the deadline is end of June. So, with that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for helping us also celebrate these great former students, one must say. And next Estrad lecture will be on February 20th in this room about cirkulära affärsmodeller, among other things. So very welcome. And thank you, Helene, and thank you, everybody. Now you can mingle and network. As you heard, that's so important. And thank you, Jakob, for being today's Darja. Thank you very much.